Well, let's begin. Good afternoon. I'm Jeff Johnson. I direct Verse Like Water. I'm a member of the English department here, and I'm so grateful that you've come for our final poetry reading of this year. As usual, there's a brief introduction lurking in my pretentious binder, but still, first, a couple of acknowledgments and thank yous. Everything begins with thanks and praise. I want to thank you all for coming, first of all. And dear teenagers, I want to thank you for quieting down your phone, if you would. And we don't need those at a poetry reading. I'd like to thank some schools that are here today as very special guests. That includes Central Lakes Adventure School, Pine River Bacchus, Long Prairie Gray Eagle, and St. John's Prep. There's students here from my old high school, I think somewhere. I also want to thank our sponsors, Minnesota Public Radio and Five Wings Arts Council. And I'd like to especially greet the new director of Five Wings. She's here today with us, Miranda Lappe. You can wave so we can see you. And Vicky Chapoulis is here too, the grandmother of Verse Like Water, who's been looking after me in this series for 13 years. Special thanks too for my donor. John Olseth, where are you? Could you give a wave? He's way in the back. John Olseth is an English professor at Riverland College, and he is a donor that has been helping me get books out with 2 large projects so far. And he recently made a full commitment to the series, and he's told me that he will supply all of the books that we need for as long as I run the series. The good news is I've hired several scientists to keep me alive, and they're doing a super good job at it. And John bought these beautiful books for us today, and I propose that we thank him thusly. John is a wonderful new friend of mine. He understands the necessity of poetry. Let's get you guys settled down. Are you from the prep school? Great. There are Johnnies among us now. We gather today to warm our hearts with poetry and to get at what I want to say. I'd like to return in thought to the wonderful moment I had yesterday at the big airport, loaning the American poet Gregory Pardlo the attire he would need to survive our most extreme cold snap of this winter season. It was like dressing up a precious doll, and he gratefully received my goose down jacket, Carhartt hat, work gloves, and the last wool Pendleton shirt I saw my father wear. I felt like the luckiest of men, especially since he had already prepaid this simple favor by making this beautiful book for all of us. Serious readers in this cozy theater likely are aware of the idea of being book-wrapped, and it only takes a few books to make you feel like you're swaddled in poetry. The contradiction is that verse can stir discomfort, even pain, and that is what I felt in my heart last week when I learned what spectral evidence was and is. Until Gregory Pardlo taught me about it, I did not know that during the days of the Salem witch trials, one could testify that the woman accused of witchcraft had appeared in a frightful, evil dream, and this alone was sufficient for conviction. The horrific idea that we can condemn one another with our imagination has not passed among forgotten things. Never in my life in this world, what Marquez called the planet of misfortune, have I seen more vilifying, accusatory fingers wagging in the air. If we're honest about it, we've been scapegoating for a very long time. Literature, the only consciousness we have, begins in a garden. And we all know that on the second page of Genesis, Adam throws Eve under a bus when God asks him why he took a bite out of that apple. As Charlie Simic writes, the butchery of the innocent never stops. Gregory Pardlo's life is witness and testimony to this truth. In the human activity of dreaming a single poem, a writer can offer what Adam Zagajewski calls a moment of lucidity. A poem can atone, repair, and maybe even heal us. And I hope you all inhabit this book with wonder and love as you encounter a man deeply attentive to the astonishing mess we call history, what was and is and will be. And now suddenly I am seeing myself leading Christian Wyman to my podium this fall. Wyman, who once imagined a poem that could last forever. Of course, this nudges me to think about a poetry reading that lasts forever. Today we'll see if that happens, but first we should offer a warm Minnesota welcome to Gregory Pardlo.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks so much. And thank you all for coming out. You know, it's an awkward feeling being thanked for coming to read, particularly when it's an event like Verses for Water, which, if you don't know, from my perspective, you know you've made it when you've been invited out to the reading series that Jeff has been curating for a very long time. So it's an honor to be here. And it's cold. Yes, I will confirm, in case you needed the confirmation. I met a lot of people today, this afternoon, or morning still. And so thanks. It's great to meet everyone. I won't try to remember names, because I will butcher. So let me jump in. Literally, figuratively. Double Dutch. Y'all know what Double Dutch is, yeah? Yeah, some nods, maybe not. So Double Dutch was a game that girls mostly play in the city with jump ropes. And there were two, so there's one girl on one side, one girl on the other side, and they have two ropes, and they're swinging the two ropes, and then the third has to jump between the two. Okay, some nods of recognition. Double Dutch. The girls turning Double Dutch bob and weave like boxers, pulling punches, shadowing each other, sparring across the slack cord, casting parabolas in the air. They whip quick as an infant's pulse, and the jumper, before she enters the winking, nods in time as if she has a notion to share, waiting her chance to speak. But she's anticipating the upbeat, like a band leader counting off the tune they are about to swing into. The jumper stair-steps into midair as if she's jumping rope in low gravity, training for a lunar mission. Airborne a moment long enough to fit a second thought in, she looks caught in the mouth bones of a fish as she flutter floats into motion like a figure in a stack of time-lapse photos thumbed alive. Once inside, the bells tied to her shoestrings rouse the gods who've lain in the dust since the Dutch acquired Manhattan. How she dances patterns like a dust-heavy bee, retracing its travels in scale before the hive. How the whole stunning contraption of girl and rope slaps and scoops like a paddle boat. Her misted skin arranges the light with each adjustment and flex, now heather-hued, now sheen, light listing on the fulcrum of a wrist and the bare jutted joints of elbow and knee, and the faceted surfaces of muscle, surfaces fracturing and reforming like a sun-tickled sleeve of running water. She makes jewelry of herself and garlands the ground with shadows. So I'm trying something new today, and that is my wife got me that's remarkable. Do you know these you've seen these things before? Yeah, so it's, I've never read from my phone or from a tablet, so this is an entirely new experiment. Let's see how horribly it botches up the progress of my reading. Okay, so that was from my first book, Totem. I'm going to read a few poems from Digest. So slave narratives. I was really interested in slave narratives for a long time. I have a PhD that I never completed. I'm still working on it, in theory. Hopefully one day I'll get it done. But one of the things I was interested in was slave narratives. And what you have to know about slave narratives is that they all begin with the same three words, I was born. And I was thinking about the ways that we are constructed by our sense of history, our sense of identity is largely constructed by what we read, right? And which is why I'm always a cheerleader for the humanities and for pursuing English as a major, literature as a major, hint, hint. This is called Written by Himself. Oh, I should also note really quickly, sorry, that many, if not most, of the slave narratives had included in the title Written by Himself, because the presumption was that someone who had escaped slavery could not write their own life story. And so they often said the amazing story of blah, 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 written by him or herself. Written by himself. I was born in minutes in a roadside kitchen, a skillet whispering my name. I was born to rainwater and lie. I was born across the river where I was borrowed with clothespins, a harrow tooth, broadsides sewn in my shoes. I returned, though it please you, through no fault of my own, pockets filled with coffee grounds and eggshells. I was born still and superstitious. I bore an unexpected burden. I gave birth, I gave blessing, I gave rise to suspicion. I was born abandoned outdoors in the heat-shaped air drifting like spirits in old windows. I was born a fraction and a cipher and a ledger entry. I was an index of first lines when I was born. I was born waist-deep, stubborn in the water, crying, ain't I a woman and a brother? I was born to this hall of mirrors, this horror story. I was born with a prologue of references, pursued by mosquitoes and thieves. I was born passing off the problem of the 20th century. I was born. I read minds before I could read fishes and loaves. I walked a piece of the way alone before I was born. So I started writing digest when my kids were very little, and I was an anxious new father. I don't know if any of you have seen this scene, but I've seen it quite enough times that it's made a deep impression on me. And that is the kid acting up in the supermarket and the mother being mortified and having to discipline the kid in the supermarket in public. So this is thinking on that experience. The Fulton Street food town is playing Motown, and I'm surprised at how quickly my daughter picks up the tune. And soon, the two of us, plowing rows of goods steeped in fructose under light thick as corn oil, are singing, "Baby, I Need Your Lovin'," unconscious of the lyrics' foreboding. My happy child riding high in the shopping cart as if she's cruising the polished aisles on a tractor laden with imperishable foodstuffs. Her cornball father enthusiastically prompting with spins and flourishes and the double barrel fingers of the gunslinger's pose. But we hear it as we round the rice and Goya aisle, that other music, the familiar exchange of anger, the war drums of parent and child. The boy wants what? To be carried? To eat the snacks right from his mother's basket? What does it matter? He's making a scene. With no self-interest beyond the pleasure of replacing wonder with wonder, my daughter asks me to name the boy's offense. I offer to buy her ice cream. How can I admit recognizing the portrait of fear the mother's face performs? The inherited terror of nonconformity, frosted with the fear of being thought disrespected by or lacking the will to discipline one's child. The boy's cries rising like hosannas as the mother's purse falls from her shoulder, her missed step from the ledge of one of her stilted heels, passion loosed with each displaced hairpin, his little jacket bunched at the collar where she has worked the marionette. Later, when I'm placing groceries on the conveyor belt, and it is clear I have forgotten the ice cream, my daughter tries her hand at this new algorithm of love, each word punctuated by her little fist. "Boy," she commands, "didn't I tell you?" Children are delightful. So in the category of poems that don't age well, well, I'll read this and you'll see what I'm referring to. But it's interesting going back to poems I'd written a long time ago and thinking about the society and the culture in which I wrote them as compared to where we are today. Raisin. I dragged my 12-year-old cousin to see the Broadway production of A Raisin in the Sun because the hip-hop mogul and rapping bachelor Diddy played the starring role. An aspiring rapper gave my cousin his last name and the occasional child support, so I thought the boy would geek to see a pop hero in the flesh as Walter Lee. My wife was newly pregnant, and I was rehearsing like Diddy, swapping fictions, surrendering his manicured thug persona for a more domestic performance. My cousin mostly yawned throughout the play. Except the moment Walter Lee's tween son stiffened on stage as if wrapped by the sound of a roulette ball. The scene? No one breathes as Walter Lee vacillates, uncertain of obsequity or indignation, after Lindner offers to buy the family out of the house they've purchased in the all-white suburb. Walter might kneel to accept, but he senses the tension in his son's gaze. I was thinking, for real though, what would Diddy do? Get rich or die trying, as 50 Cent would tell us? But my father sang, like Ricky Skaggs, "Don't get above your raisin," when, as a kid, I vowed to be a bigger man than him. That oppressive fruit dropped heavy as a medicine ball in my lap, meant to check my ego. And I imagined generations wimpling in succession like the conga marching raisins that sang Marvin's hit song. Very few people in this room know that, right? Thank you. The conga marching raisins that sang Marvin's hit song. Silly, I know. Outside the theater, my cousin told me when Diddy was 2, they found his hustler dad draping a steering wheel in Central Park with a bullet in his head. I shared what I knew of dreams deferred and Marvin Gaye. When asked if he loved his son, Marvin Sr. said, "Let's just say I didn't dislike him." Beneath the bling of many billion diodes, I walked beside the boy through Times Square, as if anticipating a magic curtain that would rise, but only one of us would get to take a bow. So yeah, there's a lot of pop culture. Pop culture does not age as well as one might like. So my kids went to school on 75th, and if this is meaningless to you, don't worry about it, 75th and 5th Avenue, which is right around the corner from the Metropolitan Museum. So for a while in my life, which you'll see in the poem, I would go to the museum, the Met, and hang out there waiting for my kids to get out of school, at which point I'd go and pick them up. This is called Wishing Well. Outside the Met, a man walks up, sun tweaking the brim sticker on his starter cap, and he says, "Pardon me, old school," he says. "You know, is this a wishing well?" "Yeah, son," I say sideways over my shrug. "Throw your bread on the water." I tighten my chest, wheezy as Rockaway beach sand, with a pull of faux smoke from my e-cig to cozy the truculence I hotbox alone, and I am at the museum because it is not a bar. Because he appears not to have changed them in days, I eye the heel-chewed hems of his pants and think probably he will ask me for 50 cents any minute now, wait for it. A smoke or something. Central Park displays the frisking transparency of autumn, tracing paper sky, Leaves like eraser crumbs gum the pavement. As if deciphering celestial script, I squint and purse off toward the roofline of the museum, aloof as he fists 2 pennies from his pockets, mumbling, and then aloud, "My man," he says, "hey, my man, I'm gonna make a wish for you too." I'm laughing now, so what, you want me to sign a waiver? He laughs along, "Ain't say all that," he says, "but you do have to hold my hand. And close your eyes." I make a starless night of my face before he asks, "Are you ready?" "Yeah, dog, I'm ready." "Sure?" "Sure, let's do this." His rough hand in mine inflates like a blood pressure cuff, and I squeeze back as if we are about to step together from the sill of all resentment and timeless toward the dream source of unneeding. The 2 of us hurtle, sharing the cosmic breast of plenitude, when I hear the coins blink against the surface and I cough up daylight like I've just been dragged ashore. "See now? You'll never walk alone," he jokes, and is about to hand me back to the day he found me in like I was a rubber duck. And he says, "You got to let go." But I feel bottomless, and I know he means well, though I don't believe, and I feel myself shaking my head no when he means let go his hand. So it's a little, look back at the earlier work. And as Jeff explained, I was thinking about, I don't know if you've studied Claudia Rankine, a very famous book called Citizen, that the year my book Digest won the Pulitzer, Claudia's book was winning absolutely everything else. It's a really powerful book, but there was a line in there where she says, "Black men are dying for the policemen's inability to control their imagination," something to that effect. I'm hardly botching the quote. But the idea was that, if you say, "I feared for my life," then that is evidence enough to convict someone, right? Whatever, it's a 10-year-old kid, "I feared for my life." Well, yes, of course, I see. You had to shoot him, right? And so whatever the case is, and, of course I understand the difficulties and complexities in that, but the fact that, that someone's imagination is enough to condemn was really impactful to me. And then to learn that during the Salem witch trials, this indeed was the case, right? That this was a legal strategy. And so that's the idea kind of informing much of the book. And I'll start with the first poem, which has nothing to do with any of that. Exordium. While sound and seaworthy, I confess a life of false confessions, false hearts, ample contempt for bench warrants charging me with failures to appear. Let what interest death's elbow grease won't erase compound. Judgments sealed in my ova, my oeuvre, my juvie, and on Q-tips scribbled like rice grains with the star shine of my stem cells. Yard sell my cracked hourglass, my salt-crusted astrolabe, my maps of the lunar seas, collect my student IDs, my employee discount, my almost winning scratch-off, take my voice mails from the clouds, dismantle my altar to Walter Mercado, phrenologist of the stars, but stay memory, time's plagiarist. Stay poem, spare tire for memory. Stay reader, beloved, prosthesis for the soul. I wasn't originally planning on reading this, but apparently in class, there's a reference in the poem to Siri. Hey, Siri. Didn't work. So apparently in class, they were reading this poem, and Jeff's phone responded to the mention of Siri. Digression. Like the ancient Scythians, I believe to see is to send spittle-like rays that grapple an object's cosmic elements and resemble them in the sweatshop of the eye, a process not unlike tasting with the nose the hollandaise that surfs a heavy sigh, a measure of telepathy, a distance relation that buckets up from the soul a spitting image. The spirit in the queen's magic mirror was enslaved there, Siri tells me. According to Jesus, adultery with the eyes is adultery. Men see, says John Berger. As if I need only observe an English muffin to find its foretexture printed on my tongue to prove the tactility of the eye, that lemony emulsion amusing your bouche too, sudden jets of saliva at mention of the lemon butter's pinch. Don't think of French kisses. According to 17th century slave codes, imagining your enslaver's death was a crime punishable by death. I've stopped looking for fear. My looking might hurt someone by accident, and I misplace my glasses at the hint of truths I don't want to see, then pat the bench around me, my chest and hips, as if I might vanish. Ancient Scythians blinded prisoners of war to mark them as slaves, a visible distinction. The eyes, the tongue, mon semblable. Watch me unlock my phone with my face. So for some reason, I got really into St. Teresa Avila, which is weird, I know, but she's kind of badass. Do you guys know St. Teresa Avila? Okay, so nun who opened all these monasteries across Spain when the church told her, don't do it, stop. We're in control, not you, we're the bosses. And she, of course, persisted and went around opening these monasteries. She was a poet, and she purportedly would meditate, would pray so deeply and with such concentration that she would levitate. So I think that's pretty cool. I've been trying to levitate. You can guess how that's going. I make up for it by going to therapy. This is called nunsploitation. Teresa Avila buzzes me in, then makes me leave my shoes in the foyer before I enter the Upper East Side tabernacle of shame she calls a therapist's office, where she divines the truths disguised by my confessions. As my bare feet cross the cold parquet, dark and cloven to a sticky rhythm, Teresa asks if tempting the goat paths that rim the ravine my passions trickle into. It's true. I'm in love with my therapist. Blame the saints' books that hearken from half a millennium away. I love her unattainable intimacy, her use of my inner ear to give goosebumps on the brain. The voice that is and is not Teresa's channels canticles and conjures woodcut illustrations of my beloved, sprouting poems from her desk at Valladolid. Above her, a dove thought winging through numinous yonder break. Teresa and Teresa and Teresa in concert, fanning out an imitation of a Hindu god. You'd expect compassion from someone who gentled her mind inside 7 mansions of prayer while feeding flames her love letters to keep them from prying eyes. Instead, she saint-splains the dangers of transference, as if I never noticed my itch to project the idea of one thing onto the figure of another, as if professing love to my therapist meant only to mask mommy issues. And anyways, isn't that a bit sanctimonious, coming from someone saving her love for a father figure whose image reflects the sum of all creation? A love so consuming, her inside song reached the sistren's ears, glued to her office door. song quoting an erotic elan, a harmony of relation probing the mystery of self-love, which is, of course, where love begins. Ipso facto, love is nothing but transference. Love is squeezing people's feet into fetishes we've schlepped hill and vale since memory, like moonlight, was the surplus of a previous life. To have come this far, across the park and through ramble and glade, knowing the glass slipper would fit almost anybody's foot I would put in it. Let the bean counters of love call that transference. Let them name this affliction what they will, as if diagnosis were a cure. Let them tabulate salvation. Tell me how many hair shirts and unanswered hungers. Tell me how many shoeless steps to beatitude. So I'm going to read the other nunsploitation. There's a famous sculpture in Rome, I believe it's in Rome. Bernini read St. Teresa's diaries, and St. Teresa describes this experience of ecstasy where this angel comes with a spear and pierces her heart. And the way she describes it, of course, to our contemporary ears, sounds very orgasmic. And so Bernini's makes a sculpture in the 15th century, 16th century, very famous sculpture of her in ecstasy. And I found myself thinking, today poets would not think of writing a poem in the voice of someone from a social group that is not their own, right? That's a big faux pas, big no-no today. But it wasn't always the case. And so it had me thinking about the role of empathy today. If we cannot imagine our lives in the shoes of others, if that is a social no-no, then that leaves us in a pretty bad spot, I think, generally. So this one is thinking about Bernini creating this sculpture of a woman in ecstasy. But for that iron's point blushing, O Lord, like a cautery tool for the wounded soul, the marble and bronze idols, an engine of reverence and tourism, Bernini distills as ecstasy. This concupiscence, this tantric sneeze. Could Bernini have rendered a pleasure, Lord, not got at the end of a spear? The highest angel haunted Teresa Avila like a Motown hook and prodded her body quiverish with love's heartburner, a rapture fantasy fathomed by her innermost yoga. Her spirit burst forth, O Lord, like a jelly jar full of lightning bugs clumsied from my handlebars. Beneath the hoodie, her head lulls sweetly with the funk of that agony glorioso, which, if you don't know, now you do, because Bernini lifted Teresa's story, Lord, like a shipwreck from its ecclesiastical groove, and mimicked her signature miracle, levitation, which she murmured into her sackcloth and wimple. He left Teresa's left foot exposed, as if to bait a bedside tidbit, the devil, for whom she had no fear, because he appeared to her toy-sized and black, and dropped by to make her pound air with laughter, all weightless, all risen by pinch and tickle, until she wet him with holy water. Lord, tell me that empathy, like art, is useless and necessary, that Bernini's inspiration is more than a contact high. Whatever he named it, Lord, this bone-still cinema, this Spartan delight, forgive him. Forgive us all, Lord, we lesser creators who conflate our subjects' demons with our own. My younger daughter is a theater geek. I took her to see Hamilton. Changed her life. So now she's all things musical theater. Strange child. This is called Theater Selfie. At Richard Rodgers Theater, I shrank my face to the box office window and confessed to the Lucite's voice vent that I'd told my wife a lie. I had hidden no Christmas gifts in the basement, nor yet acquired tickets to Hamilton for my youngest, as I boasted I would. Oblivious to cost, I was a hostage to the season and my ego, forced to drain the ATM for my deliverance. The ticket guy pshawed and, like a chilly neighbor, acknowledged me enough to punctuate his snub. But the seat map online, I pleaded, showed several vacant dots in March. No seats, he snapped. And we went on like this until I looked it up on my phone. Those? He snarled. You can't. His pause, its meaning irretrievable now, was heavy with the ghosts of Broadway's sins. It was as if a voice off stage was force-feeding him the line. You can't afford those. His cheeks ripened to prove he'd heard it just as I'd heard it, but that this time maybe he'd heard it in the way that I'd heard it. Face frozen, his eyes went floodlight, making me suddenly real. The veil had fallen between us, and we too stood outside the magic. We were our only audience. As one trained in this hackneyed improv, I knew that I might dress the specter of his fear in comedy to save him. I needed to draw him out of his head. You got kids? I asked. He nodded, but I needed to hear the emotion in his voice. What are you gonna do, huh? I laughed. It's like, what do you want from me, am I right? Then he mirrored me, shaking his head. The things we do. He asked if I could bring my kid next Tuesday. Hells yeah, I said, careful to stay in character, though I wasn't sure where he was taking us. He bent to root beneath his desk. Then the Lucite spit 2 miracles he must have set aside for someone else. The selfie we took that day tells a partial story. You see us, all teeth and safe as bros. You see me holding the tickets like a peace sign. But you could never guess the price we paid to get them. For the record, $80 a piece. Yeah. I felt terrible. No, I did. No, I did. We were 7th row orchestra. Yeah. Dragonflies. When my nephew pudges with his saggy pumpkin face, and I think maybe it's his mouth he's got around some gewgaw from the floor, I want to pry his trap open, but he won't budge. It's like his lips are sewn shut in some horror flick affliction, which is so freaking cute. I wish I could Cookie Monster his whole head. He gets it from our side, his mouth almighty, for we Pardlo men have been known to show less sense than appetite. Pop claimed I used to hum in protest the final bars of the Marseillaise, or at least that's what he heard when attacked by dragonflies, as he called it, as in, that boy got the dragonflies, the kind fictive as the boogeyman, needles stitching shut the pie holes of chatterboxes and tattletales, having mesmerized the brats like flying spoons of tapioca. I used to zip it as if I had Houdini in there, or like my tongue was busy putting boat knots in phantom maraschino stems. Boy looks like a monkey on a cupcake, the old man would say, none of which rings a bell, but he swore it's true, my face. I must have worn that foolish grin to death, as every hunger in our house was second to his, my old man, fearing, perhaps like Goya's Saturn, his dominions decline. And though he'd taunt me, I refused to let him see me cry. So, how we doing? Good, yeah? Couple more? Yeah, perfect. And then we'll chat a little bit. So we had some of the mommy poems. We're in the daddy poem phase, easing down. This is called Metaphor. It means to transfer or carry, as a man might carry his namesake in his arms or on his shoulders, cheering, "We bad, we bad," as my father did when he saw himself in me. As I came of age, however, I thought my father was, in a sense that means to hamper or impede, an embarrassment, which is, as all language is, essentially a metaphor. I.A. Richards says a metaphor consists of a tenor and a vehicle. My father would point out that he's using a metaphor to define metaphors, a literalization like the relic to the corpse. Like when Richards asks himself if a wooden leg is a metaphor for a wooden leg. My dad, Gregory Pardlo Sr., before he died, lost his leg to diabetes. Even though he would be the only person to see it, he insisted that the prosthesis precisely match his skin tone. This is the same guy who gave me a Hot Wheels car for Christmas. A joke, see? He promised me a car when I turned 16. It shimmers on my desk now, a kitschy muse with shark's teeth decals behind the wheel wells. Before he died, I told him I would have preferred a Matchbox car packaged in an actual matchbox, literalizing the figurative commingling of tenor and vehicle, more metonym than metaphor, a pedigree, in other words. He told me to get the stick out of my ass. Greg Pardlo is dead. Long live Greg Pardlo. Convertible. My pop let me steer when I was small enough to snug between his belly and the wheel. Any random intersection, he might hoist me across the handbrake onto his lap to pilot the wagon before returning me to earth. As I got older, he'd make me steer while he lit a smoke or shed his jacket. His ashes arrived in a cardboard carton with shipping labels and barcode, heavy enough to trigger the seatbelt alarm as we clipped home, honeysuckle in the air, from the post office. A reasonable person would have put the box on the floor, but you know already, don't you? I held him in my lap. "You're mine," I told the box of dad dust, lifting my hands occasionally, reckless to the wind, tempting the evening, swinging our private chariot of steel and bone. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So I think we can chat a little bit. You probably have questions about my crazy daughter. No, I love spreading her business around. Drives her bananas.
Does she write poetry back at you then?
No, my kids ran screaming from poetry. They despised, well, but that's the funny thing is my older daughter is now in college and she's an econ major. And she told me recently, she says, "You know, Daddy, I got to tell you, my favorite classes are my English classes." I said, see, it's the family business. It's hard to get away. Yeah, but yeah.
What led to you becoming a writer?
So I have probably 4 different stories to answer that question with. The most recent one is I gave an interview not long ago. This was maybe like 5 years ago. And the interviewer asked if I read poetry as a child. And just knee-jerk reaction, I was like, no, there was no poetry in our house. And I'm thinking from a teenager's perspective, there was no poetry certainly in my house, right? And my house was a madhouse. But something in a moment had me the name Robert Louis Stevenson popped into my head, A Child's Garden of Verses. And I was like, I don't know why I'm thinking of this suddenly. After the interview, I called my mother. I said, do you know this book, Robert Louis Stevenson, Child's Garden of Verses? She said, we read that book every night. We recited the poem. We know the poems so well, we recited them without even turning to the pages. And of course, I'm just like, oh my God, I love you, Mommy. How could I forget such a thing, right? And so the story I normally tell, which is I would tell to try and impress a room full of young people, is that I wanted to be a rapper, and then I started writing rap lyrics, and then moved into literature. Yeah, I guess there's some in that, but I think the logic of poetry was embedded at a very early age for me, and seeing the world as images, seeing the world as subtext, right? And as we understand, a lot of what poetry is what is not explicitly said, which is what frustrates so many of us about poetry, right? Is that it's getting underneath the poem. What is the thing behind the language? And I've just been really interested in that from a very young age. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, Jeff.
Better take one more, because we got a lot of books to sign.
Okay, please, yes. Yes, current day events inspire me to write. And what I do is I have a notebook, and I'm often just sort of, as I come across something that perplexes me and I don't have an answer for it, like spectral evidence. Why is that? Why do we rely on, is fear actually an important element in our criminal justice system, right? Is that constitutive of law? And so I'll have my notebook and I'll just write until something happens on the page that seems like I came across an idea that I wouldn't have ordinarily had without having gone through the exercise of writing. But yeah, thank you. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming. I neglected to mention Gregory would be very happy to sign books now. We're going to have an informal craft talk here at 1:30, so please circle back if you'd like to spend some more time with our poet. Thank you for coming. This fall, we'll kick things off with Christian Wyman.